It was my daughter's 10th birthday, and I had spent the entire morning making her favorite homemade mac and cheese with the breadcrumb crust she always asked for, a triple-layer chocolate cake with the sprinkles she picked out herself at the grocery store, and those little paper lantern decorations she'd seen on Pinterest and would not stop talking about for 3 weeks straight. I had taken the day off work. I'd rearranged 2 client calls and asked my coworker to cover my Friday afternoon so I could be home by noon. My daughter's name is Zoey, and she had been counting down to this birthday since August. It was now November. That's how she is. She loves things with her whole chest, and she doesn't apologize for it, and I have always loved that about her. My sister had been living with us for 11 weeks. Let me back up, because I know how that sounds and I want to be fair. When she called me in September, she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Her landlord had sold the building, new management wanted everyone out, and she had 30 days and nowhere to go. She'd burned through her savings the year before dealing with a car breakdown and some medical stuff she hadn't told anyone about. She was embarrassed. She said she just needed a few weeks, maybe a month, just to get back on her feet, find something she could afford, get stabilized. I said yes. Of course I said yes. She's my sister. I have a 3-bedroom house in a suburb outside of Columbus. I own it. I bought it 4 years ago after my divorce, which was hard and ugly and cost me more in therapy than I care to admit. But I came out the other side with a decent credit score and a house and a daughter who still thought I hung the moon. The 3rd bedroom had been my home office, but I moved my desk into the corner of the living room and I gave her that room. I bought a new set of sheets for the bed. I cleared out half the closet. I told her, take the time you need. And at first, it was okay. She helped with dishes sometimes. She watched Zoey in the afternoons when I had late calls. She made coffee in the mornings and always made enough for 2. It felt like we were a little family, the 3 of us, and some nights after Zoey went to bed, we'd sit on the couch and watch reality TV, and it almost felt like when we were teenagers, sharing a room in our parents' house in Dayton. But something shifted around week 5. I'm not sure exactly when it started. Maybe it was gradual and I just didn't want to see it. She started making comments, little ones, the kind you can't really call out without sounding crazy. She'd look at the laundry piling up and sigh loudly. She'd comment on what I was making for dinner, like, "Oh, you're doing pasta again." She'd mention how her friend's apartment had a dishwasher, how her former place had more natural light. Once, she told me my living room felt cluttered. My living room. In my house. I let it go. I'm good at letting things go. I've had years of practice. But then she started making comments about Zoey. It started small. She'd say things like, "Oh, she's still doing that?" when Zoey talked to herself while playing, which Zoey has always done, which her pediatrician said is completely normal for creative kids. She said it was a little old for Zoey to still sleep with her stuffed rabbit. She once watched Zoey struggle to read a word in a chapter book and said, in this way that made my stomach turn. Every time I told myself she didn't mean it. She was stressed. She was going through something. You don't burn a relationship over a Zoey never said anything. She's perceptive, my daughter. She picks up on everything and processes it quietly. I noticed she started eating faster at dinner. I noticed she stopped bringing her books to the table when my sister was around. I noticed she started saying "I don't know" a lot when asked questions she definitely knew the answers to, like she was preemptively protecting herself from being wrong in front of someone. That broke my heart in a way I didn't let myself fully sit with at the time. I should have. I should have sat with it and acted sooner. The night before Zoey's birthday, I had wrapped presents until midnight, hidden them in my bedroom closet, and written a card that took me 45 minutes because I kept crying in a good way. The way you cry when you look at someone you made and you still can't believe they exist, and they're yours. I went to bed feeling lucky. Zoey woke up with her hair everywhere and her eyes still half closed, and she came into the kitchen and she was so happy. I made her the birthday pancakes we do every year, the ones with the blueberries pressed into them in the shape of a smiley face, which is corny, and she is 10 years old and still asks for it. We sang happy birthday, just the 2 of us, at 7:48 in the morning, and she laughed because my voice cracks on the high note every single time. My sister came downstairs around 9. She said happy birthday to Zoey, and Zoey said thank you and smiled, and everything seemed fine. I had a small party planned for the afternoon, just 4 of Zoey's school friends and their parents. Nothing elaborate, But Zoe had a specific vision, and I had executed it faithfully. I'd blown up 18 balloons the night before. I'd made a little activity station with air-dry clay because Zoe had recently decided she was into pottery after watching too much YouTube. Everything was set up by 2 o'clock. The kids arrived. It was loud and wonderful and slightly chaotic in the way kids' birthday parties are. And I was in the kitchen cutting the cake into slices when I heard it. I heard my sister's voice from the living room, and then I heard the silence that followed. I walked to the doorway. My sister was sitting on the arm of the couch, talking to one of the other moms who'd stayed. Zoe was standing nearby with 2 of her friends, and I could see from across the room that she had gone very still. The kind of still she goes when she's trying to decide whether to cry. I looked at my sister. She was saying something about Zoe to the other mom. She was saying it with this smile, this conspiratorial smile, like she was being charming and self-aware. And what she said was, she takes after her dad's side with the processing stuff, you know? Some kids just pick things up slower. It's not a big deal. It's just, you kind of have to factor it in. The other mom looked uncomfortable. She said, and looked at her drink. Zoe's 2 friends had both heard it. I could tell from the way they weren't looking at anyone. And Zoe was holding a piece of clay she'd been working on, this little lopsided bowl she'd been so proud of, 20 minutes ago. She set it down on the table very carefully. She didn't say anything. She walked to the hallway, and I could see her shoulders had gone up around her ears the way they do when she's trying to hold herself together. I stood in that doorway for about 4 seconds. I am not a person who does well with confrontation. I spent 8 years in a marriage where I got smaller and smaller because confrontation felt like a grenade, and I was always the one afraid of the explosion. I have been in therapy specifically to unlearn that. I've sat in an office on Tuesday afternoons and practiced saying hard things out loud to a woman who looked at me patiently and said, "And then what?" until I got to the end of the fear. This was the end of the fear. I walked into the living room. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't perform anything. I just looked at my sister and I said, "I need you to come into the kitchen for a second." She gave me this look, the slightly irritated look like I was interrupting her, and followed me. I waited until we were around the corner, and then I said, "What you just said about Zoe, in front of Zoe, at her birthday party, in front of her friends and a parent she doesn't know. Don't do that." She blinked. "I was just being honest. You're always so sensitive about her." I said, "I'm sensitive about my daughter the same way any mother is sensitive about her child. That's not the point. You spoke about her like she wasn't standing right there." She heard you. She said, "Oh, come on. Kids don't even register that stuff." I felt something settle in me. It wasn't anger exactly. It was more like clarity. The kind of clarity that's quiet and a little cold. "She registered it," I said. "She set down what she was doing and she walked away. That's how she registers things." My sister looked at the floor. "She's been doing that all fall," I said. "She stopped bringing her books to dinner. Did you notice that? She used to read at the table and now she doesn't. Because she knows you'll comment on it. She's 10 years old and she's already editing herself because of what you might say." My sister opened her mouth and closed it. I said, "I want you to apologize to her. Not a big thing. Just go find her and tell her bowl is beautiful and you're sorry for what you said. And then I want you to understand that I need you to have found another place to live by December 1st. She stared at me. "That's 2.5 weeks. "I know," I said. "I'll help you look. I'll give you first month's rent as a loan, not a gift, a loan. But this situation isn't working, and it especially isn't working for Zoe. And Zoe lives here and you don't." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I can't believe you're choosing a birthday party moment to do this." "You chose this moment," I said. "I'm just responding to it." She went and found Zoe. I stood in the kitchen and held the counter for a minute. I could hear her voice in the hallway, softer than usual, and I heard Zoe say, "Okay." And I heard my sister say, "The bowl really is cool," and Zoe said, "It's supposed to be for rings, but it kind of looks like a taco." And my sister laughed a little, and Zoe laughed a little, and I let out a breath. The party continued. The kids ate cake, and the parents chatted, and Zoe opened her presents in the living room and shrieked at the art kit I'd gotten her, the real one with the pastels and the good paper. The one she'd shown me a picture of. 3 times without ever directly asking for it. She hugged me so hard, my back cracked. After the guests left, my sister was quiet. She helped stock plates without being asked, which she hadn't done in weeks. We didn't talk about it again that night. I did not sleep well. Here's what I hadn't told anyone, including my sister, including my therapist, though I was going to. About 2 weeks earlier, I had borrowed my sister's phone charger because mine had fritzed out, and when I picked it up off the kitchen table, I accidentally knocked it, and the screen lit up with a message notification. I wasn't trying to read it. I genuinely wasn't. But the name at the top of the notification was my ex-husband's name, and the preview text said, I know. She doesn't have to find out. I had put the phone down and stood there for a moment. Then I had gone to my room and sat on my bed and thought about whether I was catastrophizing. I am a person who has been in therapy. I know what catastrophizing looks like. I spent a long time talking myself through whether this could mean something innocent. It could not mean something innocent. My ex-husband and I have been divorced for 4 years. We co-parent Zoey, and we are civil. We are not friends. He had not mentioned anything to me about being in contact with my sister. My sister had not mentioned anything to me about being in contact with my ex-husband. And the message said, she doesn't have to find out. I want to be clear that I did not go looking for more information. I decided to wait. I decided I needed to be sure before I said anything, because I had already been through the thing of blowing up relationships based on incomplete information and having it turn out to be more complicated than I thought. And I had a daughter who shared a last name with this man, and I needed to think. I thought about it for 2 weeks. I watched my sister in my house, eating my food and sighing at my clutter, and making comments about my daughter's development. And I held what I knew very quietly inside my chest. Like a stone I was not ready to put down. The day after the birthday party, I asked my sister directly. We were drinking coffee in the morning, and Zoey was still asleep, and the house was quiet, and I said, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Are you in contact with my ex-husband? She looked at her cup. She didn't say no immediately, which is its own answer. We've been talking, she said finally. It's not what you think. What do I think? I said. She looked up at me. It's been going on for a little while. We ran into each other in September, before I came here. I know. I put my cup down. You came here in September, I said. He never mentioned seeing you. You never mentioned seeing him. You've been living in my house and you've been in contact with my ex-husband and hiding it from me. She started to say something about how it wasn't planned, how she knew it was wrong, how she was going to tell me, how she'd been trying to figure out how to say it. I have heard variations of this speech before, from a different person in a different kitchen a long time ago. It did not make me feel better then either. I said, I think you should start looking for a place today, not December 1st, today. She started crying. She said she had nowhere to go. She said she was sorry. She said she never meant to hurt me. I said, I'm not doing this out of anger. I'm doing this because you've been in my home for almost 3 months. You've been unkind to my daughter, and you've been hiding something from me that directly affects my family. All 3 of those things together means I can't trust you in this space anymore. That's not a punishment. That's just where we are. She called her mom that afternoon. I know because our mom called me an hour later and started the conversation with, she's going through a really hard time. And I said, I know, so am I. And our mom was quiet because she didn't have a response to that. And eventually, she said she'd let my sister stay with her for a few weeks while she sorted things out. That was fine. That was a solution. That was not my problem to solve. My sister was out of my house within 3 days. She took her things in boxes in a duffel bag, and she didn't ask me to help carry anything, which I appreciated. She didn't say much when she left. She looked tired. I felt tired too. I stood in the doorway of the bedroom after she was gone, and I looked at the room and I thought about what I'd thought when I gave it to her. Take the time you need. And I thought about how much I'd meant that, and how genuinely I had wanted her to be okay. I still want her to be okay. That part hasn't changed. But I also want Zoey to be able to set her lopsided clay bowl on a table in her own house and not feel like she has to apologize for it. I want Zoey to bring her book to dinner. I want Zoey to not edit herself before she walks into a room. the week after my sister left, Zoe came home from school, and I was working at the kitchen table, and she sat across from me with her chapter book and read for 20 minutes while I finished my emails. She didn't ask if it was okay. She just sat down and read, and when I looked up, she had her chin on her hand and her eyes were moving quickly across the page, and she looked so easy in her own skin. I texted my therapist. She brought her book to dinner. My therapist wrote back, "That's the whole thing right there. I know I'll have to talk to my sister eventually. I know we'll have to figure out what we are to each other going forward, what my ex-husband is to this story, what the truth is about what they were, and what they told themselves about it. I know my mom will want us to make peace, and that there will be holidays, and that it will be complicated and unresolved in the way family things always are. But right now, Zoe has her clay bowl on her dresser, the lopsided one that looks like a taco, and she put 3 of her rings in it, and she told me it works great, actually. And she brought her book to the table last night and read 3 chapters while I made dinner and talked out loud to herself at one point about a plot hole she'd found. And I said, 'Good catch.' And she said, 'I know, right?' I filed no legal documents. I sent no dramatic text messages. I did not yell or throw anything, or do any of the things that feel satisfying to imagine and hollow to actually do. I just said what was true, that the trust was gone, that my daughter came first, that the door was that way, and I meant every word. Some lessons you learn once and they stick. Some you have to learn over and over. Learning to say, 'I need you to leave,' is one I apparently needed to learn again, in a slightly different form with a slightly different person, standing in a kitchen I own, next to a daughter who puts down her bowl and walks away quiet instead of crying because she's already learned to hold herself together in the presence of people who don't mean to hurt her but do anyway. She learned that from somewhere. I know where she learned it, so I'm done being the person she learns it from." I've been thinking a lot about cause and effect lately. Not in a dramatic way, just in the quiet, honest way you think about things. When the dust is settled and you're standing in a kitchen that finally feels like yours again. What happened with my sister didn't come out of nowhere. I know that now. The truth is, it was built slowly, one ignored comment at a time, one swallowed feeling at a time. Every time I told myself she didn't mean it, every time I prioritized keeping the peace over telling the truth, I was making a small choice. And small choices stack. They stack until they become the life you're living. And one day you look up, and your 10-year-old has stopped bringing her book to the dinner table, and you don't even remember when that happened. That's the thing nobody tells you about conflict avoidance. It feels like wisdom when you're doing it. It feels like patience, like generosity, like being the bigger person. But there's a version of it that's just fear wearing a nice coat. I know because I wore that coat for years, in my marriage, and then again, apparently, in my own house, with my own sister, while my daughter quietly learned to make herself smaller in a room she had every right to fill. Zoe didn't say a word at that birthday party when she set her bowl down and walked away. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just went still and removed herself. And watching a 10-year-old already know how to do that, was the clearest mirror I've ever been handed. She learned to absorb a wound and keep moving from somewhere. I know exactly where. So when I finally said what needed to be said, it wasn't about anger. It wasn't revenge. It was just, I had run out of reasons to protect a version of the peace that was only peaceful for one of us. My sister had been in my home. She had eaten at my table and slept in my guest room and received my goodwill, and she had used that safety to say something cruel about my child in front of her friends on her birthday, and she had been hiding contact with my ex-husband the entire time. Those two things together aren't bad luck. They're a pattern. And patterns don't change because you're patient with them. They change when you stop feeding them. Integrity, I've come to understand, is not about grand gestures. It's about what you do in the small moments when nobody's watching. And the cost of honesty feels higher than the cost of silence. I failed that test for 11 weeks. And then finally, I didn't. Zoe has her bowl on her dresser now. She brought her book to dinner last Tuesday and the Tuesday before that. She talks to herself when she reads, and she doesn't check anyone's face to see if that's okay. She's just a kid in her own house being herself, which is the most ordinary thing in the world, and which I will not take for granted again. I don't know what happens next with my sister. I don't know what the truth is about her and my ex-husband, or whether I'll ever fully have it. What I know is that I finally chose clearly, my daughter first, my home second, the peace of other people a distant third, and that choice cost me something and was still worth it. That's usually how the right choices go.